A session facilitator is monitoring the questions and will pose them at suitable times during the presentation. If we aren't able to answer all the questions during the live presentation, we will answer them via email after the session is over. It is important that you include your email address when you ask a question. Otherwise, we will have no way to respond to you. Sorry about that. I realized I forgot to unmute the video conferencing. In order to receive your certificate of attendance, you must have signed in after 8:45 a.m. Evaluations for this session will be emailed to you after the session. Please complete them. We rely on your feedback to continually improve what we do and how we do it. Today's presentation will be posted for viewing on the Government of Alberta website, fasd.alberta.ca, within 2 weeks of today's date. If you experience any technical issues, please email support@cmgcanada.ca. Also, please let your local tech support know, as the problem may originate at your end. As Alberta advances with the FASD 10-year strategic plan, education and training continue to play a key role. This is our 6th year of offering sessions and our 3rd year of delivering the material as webinars. As always, all sessions are recorded and made available on the GOA website, fasd.alberta.ca. We are pleased with the ongoing interest and attendance in this initiative. I now have the pleasure of introducing our presenters. Teresa O'Riordan recently retired as the Executive Director of the Northwest Central FASD Network after being part of the network's initial steering committee, the leadership team, and then Executive Director. Teresa's constant desire for learning and ongoing understanding of First Nations began in her early teens and progressed through adulthood via varied personal and work-related experiences. Teresa has been privileged to work on several FASD-related projects with First Nation communities to enhance the cultural appropriateness of network services delivered on reserve. Teresa's worldview has been shaped by values and beliefs that closely align with Indigenous perspectives. Rupert Arcand is currently the director of Yellowhead Tribal Corrections Society and a member of the Alexander First Nation. Rupert's intimate knowledge and understanding of First Nations is enriched by formal post-secondary training as an educator and in the field of corrections. He has been a champion of sentencing circles as a means of justice with Aboriginal populations in Alberta and Canada, and of early intervention and supports for individuals and families affected by FASD. Most recently, Rupert served as a panel member for the recent IHG Symposium on Mental Health and Justice, and has taken on the role of First Nations consultant for CASA. Please join me in welcoming Teresa and Rupert.
Good morning and welcome. Good morning, Rupert.
Morning, Teresa.
So I don't know about you, Rupert, but I was really struck with the introduction in terms of the commitment to ongoing learning for FASD. And so for me, that really is a good place to start with my commitment to ongoing learning, and a thank you for the help you've given me, even in preparing for today's presentation, the learning that I continue to do with how to be appropriate, how to be sensitive to the issues, and how to be a good partner. So I want to thank you in advance for working with me in preparation and in presenting today.
Thank you, Teresa. And I just want to comment, first of all, on how intimate I was with First Nations. And so my intimacy relates to my being First Nation and my living in a First Nation. Just thought I should clear that up as Nicole introduced it. So anyway, I want to thank everybody for whoever's listening in, and Teresa for inviting me in and helping me to become more aware of an issue that is very difficult to understand until you begin to spend time looking at it and begin to understand that it's not as difficult to understand as one might think. But before today, one of the things that sometimes others may not be aware of is that prior to us coming here today, there's a lot of background work that has to go on at the community level. And the elder that works with our community program, or community, the Kind Heart program in the Alexander First Nation, is currently in the hospital. He's very ill. And my concern about that, and so I would ask that if anyone out there would like to offer their prayer and their prayer for his well-being, then I would appreciate that, and I know his family would as well. I made offerings last night to honor the work that I and Teresa would do here today, and that we would do it in the proper manner and in a way that honors the people that we work with. So just wanted to start with that.
Thank you. And indeed, our thoughts and prayers go for Tony's health and well-being. He's been a real gift to the work that we've done together, but also for me individually. I know that he has also offered prayers for my well-being as we've hit some bumpy spots along our life path. You know, with the title, the First Nation Response to FASD, there's two complex issues that are presented right away. One is as an external agency, being predominantly white, raised middle class, emphasis on formal education. Right away we start to have some potential areas for there to be miscommunication and misunderstanding between Indigenous perspectives and white perspectives. There's also great opportunity for us to see where we're the same and come at things with similar values. So that becomes a touchy area because it requires a lot of trust in terms of who am I, what am I bringing forward as an individual, but also who do I represent in terms of the organization, in terms of white society, in terms of an external body delivering services on reserve. And I want to acknowledge that there's been a lot of bad history where good intentions have not gone as planned, where there has been unintentional harm even though good initiatives were undertaken. So I remember, Rupert, when we first met, one of the first things I said to you was that I'm going to make mistakes. And I would ask not just for your forgiveness, but I would also need your guidance so that I could learn from my mistakes. And that has been really helpful, very helpful on more than one occasion. The second area that is challenging and how we've titled this topic is FASD. We still have a huge learning curve, both on reserve and off reserve, within service providers, policymakers, funders, around what does this truly look like, lived realities? How are people impacted? And from a white worldview, my first place is I look at the individual, and then it grows out to I look at the family, and then I look at the community. And it brings it right into play around the difference between the Indigenous and the white worldview. Because so far my experience has been the approach to FASD from a First Nations perspective is looking at it, how does it impact the community, the family, and then the individual. So we have different starting places, and it's been very valuable that we can honor the perspectives that each of us bring to the work.
I think, Teresa, that that's very true, and my experience has been one of the keys to the work that we've done is the development of a relationship. Most often when I've met non-First Nation people, the question I'm asked is, what's your name and what do you do? And I tend to get put in a box as to what do I do, as opposed to who I am. And from when I meet a First Nation person, the relationship begins to be built at that moment, because our questions begin to start far apart and find connections. Find how we're connected. Where you from? What nation you from? Where is that located? Are you from? And so finally we start finding names in common. And as we find those names in common, we start bringing them closer to who we know well. And then our connection is made. And I know one of the first times I was at CASA, I had the opportunity to meet a lady by the name of Brenda. And I met her that first day, and there was a meeting. And we got to talking, and that dance went on in terms of developing connections. During the meeting, we'd spent time doing that already, probably 10, 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes before the meeting started. And then once the meeting started, people thought that we'd known each other for a long, long time, and we hadn't. We just met, but it appeared that we had, because we'd had already made those connections and developed that bond in terms of our relationship. So it's just a different way about going about it. Mm-hmm. But one that's very important in terms of working with Aboriginal people, and in particular First Nations. Mm-hmm. And remember that what works for one is not going to work for all. What works for Alexander will work for Alexander, but may not work for a community right next to it. Mm-hmm. So to be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. You know, when I think about my work and how I have managed to be engaged and step into community, I have wondered, why has it worked so well, and why has it felt like it's in my nature? And so when I think about, you know, where I come from, I was born and raised in Camrose. It's a relatively small community. I was the oldest of 2 children and spent a lot of time with my grandparents. And so as a little girl, I learned how to listen and how to watch. So I remember going into some of the meetings that we had in community and watching and seeing, so when people come into the room, they shake hands. Oh. So I thought to myself, Teresa, this would be a good thing to learn and to start to do. And walking into a room and greeting everyone as they come in, or if they're already there, me coming in. It's those little things that I think have potential to trip up external organizations when we work in First Nations. It's not necessarily so that that's how we greet one another when we are meeting in downtown Edmonton. I call it welcoming. The hospitality that's been afforded, where tea and coffee is offered, water is offered, oftentimes there will be food or snacks. I remember a time when that was more common, but in more recent times, within that business way of working, some of those hospitality things have gone by the wayside. And that, in fact, for me, raises a flag around where we potentially could have missteps around engaging with First Nation communities, and then add to it the comfort that comes with knowing that I've been welcomed, then the touchy conversations around FASD are somewhat eased.
You know, I think, and I don't speak for everyone, just so to be clear that I speak for Rupert and my views on things. I think that the area, the point around trust is that in many instances in our history, we've reached out, people have taken our hands and have led us down the path, and as a result of being led down that path, we've been hurt. And our families have been hurt, and our children have been hurt. And so after a number of times, you become a little weary of doing that. And so you're willing to extend very slowly and very cautiously your hand of welcome, your hand, because you need to feel very, very secure with the person that you're meeting with. My relationship with Teresa, I had to feel very comfortable with who she was, what I know about her, how she, and being around her, because I have to see how she interacts with other people to better understand whether what her value base is, and to try to get a sense of that. And so being around her probably for close to a year, maybe not that long, but fairly often, we were talking in meetings and greeting and meeting other people, and watching how somebody does that tells you a lot about them. And so it was at some point along that way that I believe that I trusted Teresa and who she was enough to bring her into my community and begin to introduce her to the people that I believed she needed to meet. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't happen too easily.
Mm-hmm. The idea of number one, earning that trust takes time. So when I think of what other situations in my life does that happen, I was a foster parent for 27 years. And I had the experience, a lived reality of seeing young, middle-aged, and older children come into my home with that sense of mistrust, having a lot of history with hurt, being disappointed by adults, being watched, and needing to earn the gift of their acceptance and their trust and eventually their love. When I think about why we would be sharing our story, I would like people to come away knowing how deeply personal this work is. That who we are as people really matters, and it's our whole person. It's where we've come from in terms of our ancestors. It's our future, our children and our grandchildren. And it's about the personal and the professional. So there's no doubt that this is professional work. And who I am as a person, and who my staff are as people, and the people in your community, our lives touch one another. And we need to be able to, as you say, build that trust to be able to share. Well, what is that like? Both our sorrows and our joys. Because it does impact our work. It impacts how well I'm able to listen. It has an effect on, am I able to make good decisions and follow through? I also think that there's something important that you mentioned, that we started meeting for a year. And we had repeat performances. And that reminds me of when you build a relationship with a baby, it's not a one-off. You don't get to have a 1 or 2 hour holding session with an infant, walk away and say, I've got a good relationship with this infant. We need to have spent time together repeatedly to both assess whether or not we're comfortable in going to the next level. That degree of interaction over time with repetition, I think for me, in my experience, it anchors what I know to be true.
I agree with that, and I think that part of that relationship building was not only the interaction in the time that I and you spent together. You got to know as well a very dear friend of mine, Peter Ayat, who I've known for 25 years, and have gotten to know very well, and have gotten to a place where I really trust Peter, and I trust his views on things. And when Peter begins to trust someone and says that's a good person, I believe that. And his relationship with Teresa became one that was very close, became one that, as the work that Peter did and the work that I did, we began to trust what Teresa was saying to us about how FASD works and how it doesn't work and how it impacts our lives and how it impacts the lives of the people that we come into contact with. And so those other connections or linkages also enhance that relationship building. And so slowly Teresa began to meet other people from the community that didn't take long when you get to know this lady that you begin to embrace that what she has to say.
Thank you. And likewise, Rupert, you also come with champions and people who sing your praises, not only in our jurisdiction, but across the province. The idea of building trust and getting to know each other and trust each other also has a component of being of real help. Many of us probably in our personal and our professional lives know people who can talk a good talk. And then nothing happens. And so, again, most of us have raised children or, go back and think of our own relationships with our parents. And you know that that trust is built when, if you cry out, someone responds. They respond in a timely fashion. They respond in a way that meets your need. Within First Nation communities, although not only First Nation communities, there is a huge need to respond effectively to FASD. And the need is great and it's wide. So there's a need for training. There's a need for resources. There's a need for hands and feet on the ground. And so we use the word consultation and engagement a lot within government and business. That needs to be real from the people who are receiving the information. It needs to be real to the people who are accessing or requesting the resources. So not only does that require a good amount of listening, but in fact, after meetings, after listening, there was a commitment on my part. I was very compelled. I needed to respond in a timely fashion. And I needed to get back to people to let them know I was responding in a timely fashion. So I know how frustrated I get when I send off an email and I don't know if it's been received. A little bit like that. You send out some information, you listen, and you ask for things, and then you wait, and you wait, and you wait. And then you wonder if you were even listened to. Did they really hear? And then the other question is, did they care enough to want to do something about it? So hearing of the need around FASD, the response, resources that are needed in community, for me was very compelling, and hence why the work with Peter and the FASD justice work worked so well, because he was able, with his in-depth experience on reserve and Alexis in particular, identified an unmet need within the adult justice system. He raised the need, and we had the benefit and real privilege of having Alberta Health respond quickly to the network's identification of a need, which was adults need to be able to access FASD assessments when referred from justice, and somebody else has to pay for it because justice can't do it. So there was, it was some magic. It was the right people, the right time, the right supporters, and you played a key role in that, facilitating and confirming the needs. So the more voices, the more working together, the more that the hope actually was more than just an idea, that in fact those services got up and running and protocols and revisions to the way the justice system was working with our clients has been and continues to change.
I think that my view is that I know in the work that I do, or as working with the criminal justice system, and working with our people that come into conflict. Conflict? Yeah, well, that's probably it. Conflict with that system, that finding out that many of them they're not criminal in nature in terms of what may be viewed as criminal, and that's not a life they want to lead. Most often, they get into conflict with the law as a result of abuse of alcohol. In the last 25 years, I can't remember one case where we had someone in court go on probation or go on one conditional sentence that did it while sober. And that says to me that there's a problem with alcohol. And if there's a problem with alcohol, and the numbers that we're seeing are coming from not only young males, but young females as well, then there's a problem that's larger than just what we're seeing in front of us. There's the underlying issue of FASD as I've come to know it. And so my concern with that is this needs to have some action. We need to create awareness. We need to create education. We need to do it in a way that's the community feels safe. The community feels not like they're being talked down to, or that they're being talked to in a language that is really difficult to understand. And in our discussions with the elders in my community, they've clearly said, you need to present this stuff in a way that we can understand. You need to present this in a way that makes sense for us. You need to present this stuff in a way that is useful to us, not useful to you. And they were quite clear in making those comments.
Mm-hmm. And isn't that one of the challenges? Because FASD is a medical diagnosis. And so we have medical jargon. And even the acronym FASD, those of us that are involved in this work, we rattle that off without thinking about it. And then when we are asked to say, well, what does that mean? Even fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is a mouthful. And it may mean different things to different people, and there will be people that don't understand some of the words that have just been used. So right away, there's a potential for misunderstanding, and it can set up a dynamic of feeling excluded from really, really important conversations. And so I think, Rupert, you've got some really good examples of when elders have said, FASD, what's that? And
you know, in my community, there's, I stop in the morning sometimes and I'll have coffee. And many small towns in this province have, or in other provinces, have little restaurants where a lot of the old guys kind of gather and sit and have coffee in the morning. Probably familiar with that. We have that in our community as well. And I think a lot of our reserves do as well. And I stop in and I chat with the guys because I get a better sense of what's going on in the community. I get a sense of the pulse of what's going on in the community. And I also get a chance to talk to old friends. And that's important, to touch base with them. And they ask the question, well, Rupert, what's this FASD stuff? And for me to go into a detailed, long explanation, they'll probably walk away and I'll be talking to myself. So my response was, when a female is pregnant and she drinks alcohol, there's an element, there's something in the alcohol that does damage to the brain of the child that's in the womb. And when the child is born, it's going to have a lot of problems functioning. That's all they need. They don't need to know all the medical diagnosis, all of the information around it. Professionals who are helping those families need to know the results of assessments, because that gives you tools in terms of how to work with the individual. If you're fortunate enough to have a mentor, then that assessment gives you the tools to work with the individual. But at the local level, They just need to know what it is.
I know when I started in the world of FASD, one of the things I was sensitive to, being a woman, was the potential for the diagnosis of FASD to be used to bash women, to blame mothers, that somehow that they are responsible and to blame for the condition that a child would be born with as a result of drinking while pregnant. I found it very refreshing when we had a consultation with elders and they started to raise their questions around, well, what is this FASD? What does that look like? What's being done about it? And their guidance around how to address the issue. So again, coming from white society, external organization, schooled in a different way, the typical way that I would want to respond would be, how do we get information out to the professionals? The teachers, the social workers, the health professionals, the folks that are working with clients and working with young women. So it was refreshing to get feedback from the elders around, there is another way. There's another way that we share information. There's another way that we give guidance to our young people. And in fact, it is those people that should be getting information so that they can share with their family members and their community members. So again, good intention to come and want to talk about FASD and prevention, but coming at it in a way that was a misfit with how the community was feeling would work best for them. So this sensitive issue about women and drinking and who should be sharing the message, the elders gave some very helpful guidance around what was needed. And they also made a commitment to help us get the message right, which was a real blessing.
I think for myself, Teresa, that part of my experience has been that when I think of my community, in the early 70s, before a program that's called the National Native Alcohol and Drug Abuse Program became a national program, which is on every First Nation, and depending on population. Before that came into being, there was a lot of research that went on to identified that as a result of the significant similarist policies of the federal government or the government of the time, as a result of the residential schools, as a result of the 60 scoop, as a result of a number of those historical things that have happened, that in 1960, First Nations for the first time lobbying passed that allowed us, that didn't outlaw us from practicing our traditions, that didn't outlaw us from leaving the reservation, but instead gave us the right to become Canadians. For the first time, we were recognized as Canadians. Some First Nations still don't call themselves Canadians. They call themselves by whatever nation they are. But we're recognized in law as Canadians. We're allowed to vote. We're also allowed for the first time to legally enter alcohol or liquor establishments, bars. We're also able to buy it. And so that kind of busted loose the gates, and everybody, a lot of the survivors from the residential schools and other things that I mentioned now had free time to be able to abuse, and believe me, they did, for a number of reasons. One being, for that brief period in time, the point of drinking was not to socialize. The point of drinking was to get drunk. The point of getting drunk was to forget the pain, if only for a brief moment in time. And if you're fortunate to black out so you really didn't remember that time. Unfortunate part about that is you couldn't remember not feeling the pain. And so with that as being part of our history, and with the NADAP program being placed as a national program in First Nations across this country, it says to me that invariably there was an identifiable problem with alcohol abuse, because that was the initial purpose of the NADAP program, is to address alcohol abuse. And so if it was that widespread, then it creates, to me, a concern with FASD and the relationship that FASD has with use and abuse of alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's a big history that has lots of trauma attached to it. And the services that the Northwest Central FASD network was offering to the community were services meant to identify FASD, provide supports, and start to address the prevention component. Not at all to replace NADAP, not at all to replace other services on reserve, but to augment and to give more information in a way that would be useful and helpful and respectful. I think where there's a really lovely fit between the Alberta FASD networks and First Nation community values is the fact that in Alberta there's a commitment to relationship-based practice, that our assessment and diagnostic teams take to heart the people who are before them, their caregivers and their communities. That the PCAP model, which is an FASD prevention model, and PCAP stands for Parent-Child Assistance Program, it has built as its fundamental framework the emphasis on building relationships, and that it takes time, and it needs to be client-driven, and that there is hope. And the same with the supports, the mentoring programs. Those acknowledge that the help is best delivered when it's a hand-in-hand and walking side by side. So it's not a parachute in and then rocket out of there. It's a staying put, which when I think of trust, that trust needs to happen at all levels. For us, between organizations, people that want to help, but also between the service delivery and the clients. So that in fact what we have is some congruence around expectations. What does this work look like? How should it feel when getting the help? What will the staff need, and what does the community need? It all goes back to relationship, to being present, showing up as a whole person, responding in a way that is effective, and that effectiveness isn't determined by me, the service giver. It's determined by the person receiving the services. This really made a difference for me, or not? And if not, why not? The consultation with the elders in the community for me is very similar to that. This is what we're doing. Is this working? What's your guidance? And then taking that back and revising as needed.
So to just follow to give people a sense of a timeline of events, we talked a bit about when we met, how we met, and as I think about involving the community, it happened in an interesting fashion. We had the justice meetings going on, or we called them the protocol meetings, where we had judges, crowns, defense lawyers, FASD network, probation, court work, community people, and a lot of people from within government began to attend our meetings. And at one of those meetings, a lady from, I believe she was from the Cross Ministry, had been attending the meetings and brought the idea to Teresa and to talk about the potential for creating a pilot or a program over a period of 3 years. And I'll let you talk a bit about how that happened.
Well, it's one of those things of careful what you wish for. So Judge Ayotte, had asked for some, information on FASD, and so he facilitated the training. So very, very similar to the way that I was welcomed into community due to your championing of the network. Judge Ayotte also, within his community of judges, was able to champion the need for FASD training. So we were able to deliver the training to judges and to a full day training, actually, all day Friday. What a unusual happening, and very much appreciated. And then the next day, an all day training for both defense and Crown prosecutors. Once people got trained up, of course, the next thing is, all right, now we know that this is an issue. I'm strongly thinking people that are coming before me, that there will be some people that would need to get a referral for assessment and diagnosis. So, who do we refer to? You can refer to the networks. Okay, so Teresa, in your area, how many people can I refer to you? Well, at that point in time, there was funding for 5 adults in a year for adult assessment. And Judge Ayotte had some very succinct language that basically said, oh shucks, Teresa, I'll overwhelm you in 1 week. Now, the way that funding often works is we need to demonstrate need before we get funding. So he said, okay, start bringing those referrals forward, and then I can say to the funders, we have unmet need and what's available for help. We were able to do that quickly. And then Alberta Health stepped up and said, we would like to be able to fund some FASD assessments for adults referred specifically from Justice. We accepted those funds and the responsibilities that came with that. And then the next step was, okay, so now we've got, Justice stakeholders who are informed and involved. We have access to the resource to get assessment and diagnosis done. Now they're in our community, and we know better, we know different, and there's no more help to be had. Everybody is doing as much as they can, as fast as they can, and we've just identified that these individuals need more help. So we took that again back to the funder to say, the community, the stakeholders have identified that all of these things that we've done so far are necessary and good, and then it raises the gap around we have unmet need in communities. And then Alberta Health offered the 3-year proposal between 2 communities. And so Alexis and Alexander then were the 2 communities within my network area that were in a ready place to be working with the network and to be receiving services from an external agency on reserve. And that's how I remember it.
That's how I remember it. From that point, the creation and Teresa worked really clearly was concerned and wanted involvement from the community, involvement from a variety of sources within the community, elders, program people, just community people, and to put together what would be the proposal to and formulate the ideas of what the program would look like at the community level that would go forward for funding from the sources that she talked about. What ended up happening is community development did a wonderful job in facilitating and working with those groups that met a number of times to come up with a vision, goals, objectives, and a direction in terms of what they wanted to achieve. The participation level I was surprised and happy at the same time. I think the participation level got us to a place, or got the proposal to a place where the next step was then to implement. And maybe you can talk a bit about, from your view, how that implementation happened, and then I'll talk a bit about the implementation as I saw it from my side of the fence.
So one of my pet peeves as a citizen of Alberta, as a former foster parent, has been when there's been community consultation but the plan has already been developed. And it feels like rubber stamping. And so then it feels like a waste of my time. I don't feel like there's value for what I consider to be a gift. If I'm going to give you my input, I would like it to be received and honored. So there was a commitment, a personal commitment on my part, that I did not want to in any way replicate that experience for anybody else. So when we identified that there was a need, a service delivery gap, we started that consultation with both of the communities to say, we don't know if funding will come or when it will come, but when that window opens up, we'd like to be ready. But not ready in that I've done the work sitting at my desk, putting the words on page, and then I'll just give it to you to review. But really, right from the ground up, right from the very beginning, right from that place of, I don't know anything until you tell me. And so we had elders from both communities, we had representatives from departments from both communities. Rupert also participated, representing YTCCS, and we engaged in repeated full-day meetings where we wrestled things to the ground. And I think that was probably some of the beginnings of building that trust. It also is a place to reopen old wounds, because there's no getting around it. I'm white. And the community development facilitator is white. And this is provincial funding, which is government, which also has had some bad history, not provincially speaking, but funder related, that sometimes you can be set up to fail. What is that? How do we address those needs? So the network was wanting to ensure that people stayed involved through every step of the process. So they, in part of implementation, they were responsible for shortlisting resumes, of being part of the interviewing panel, and providing the ongoing guidance and support to staff that eventually were hired. So even though the staff were part of network staff, in terms of guiding the work that was being done with clients, that was being done in community, that really needed a hands-on approach with helping the workers deliver the services in a way that was seen as being respectful, effective, and I guess planted those seeds of hope, not just for the client, but for the community.
I think that as the process began in developing and bringing people together, and the sessions that I attended, the participation level was very high. People participated, but there was always a bit of doubt as to whether the community would really influence and have a lot of influence in what happened in their community. There was always that bit of doubt whether that would happen or not. And so after we went through the interviews, which the community sat at the table and decided who the mentors were going to be, they selected them. They were the interview people. The community people formed the steering committee, for want of a better word, steering committee, which was part of the proposal, which would say this is going to be the people who are going to guide the program as it begins to do what it does within our community, begin to help it grow within our community, begin to sow the seed so that it can flourish into more than. And so amongst those people who sat on that group are representatives from education, health, social development, I believe there's and myself, it's an external agency, and we have the network, and we also have, and we're looking at inviting more people to the table as we move along. We also were clear that we needed to have an elder to provide guidance to us. And in doing so, early on it was quite clear that the elder wanted us to ensure that we followed proper protocols. And so part of the proper protocol was that as we began to form to the need to have a feast, to make offerings in the proper manner of that community and the way that community does that, we had to follow that. And we did that. And when we were sitting at the Elders Lodge participating in this, the number of leadership members from our community that attended was significant. The number of youth from the school who came and participated and brought their drums and sang, the number of community people and program people who attended made it more significant, created more significance for it within the community and gave it more life. And I think that was the beginning of the work. It really was the beginning.
Mm-hmm. You know, as you start to name the people that were being represented, I get that picture of the room and of the volume of people and the attention that they gave to what was being said. It was very, very powerful. And I know when we lost sleep over this, so I want people to know that should you have the courage to go forward on something like this, be prepared to sweat blood and to lose sleep. Because it's big. It's a little bit like planning a wedding. There's an awful lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes, and you really are needing everyone to do their role, and you hope that everything happens in the right sequence, because folks know when things are a misstep. I was very tired when we were done. It was a good tired, but I realized, you know, how much of me was invested in the process, in paying attention to how was the message being received? What were the dynamics between and amongst people? Keeping that in mind, because those observations need to be then translated after the fact around, so what are our next steps and how do we know that we are on the right path? It was an amazing day.
I think that that's true. There was a lot of behind the scenes work that started happening long before that day happened. The elder identified the date of when we should do that, and then the work began to make the proper offerings, to follow proper protocol. And my feeling at that time, once the proper protocol was followed and the offerings were made to the proper people, then my responsibility in how that plays out, I followed my responsibility, and I can move away from that and trust and have a leap of faith. Although I didn't take a lot of faith, because I've seen this happen many times over and over again. And I was telling Teresa, it's going to happen. Don't worry, it'll be fine. People will be there. Many times, and Linda my wife was telling her the same thing. It'll be okay. And I know Tony was saying the same thing. And it did. And the acknowledgement that we were going to begin a journey that was not going to be easy was there. And then we began the work to move forward. And that work involves the mentor that works with the individuals as they're assessed, the individuals that are going to be assessed. I'll let you talk about that.
Oh, really? My brain was going somewhere else.
That's okay.
So back up just a little bit, that if I had one piece of advice for folks moving forward, is that all that work behind the scenes has a budget implication. Let's be really clear about that. It costs money to do things the right way. So you know, if you were to invite people to your home and you were going to feed them, you know that you have to have some money set aside to go buy food. You know that. That's how we run our household. This is no different. When there is a gathering, we need to ensure that there is the proper amount of resources that are put behind it to make sure that what is needed is available and purchased, and that things have been done in the proper way. And in all honesty, I didn't know that going forward. I didn't know what that really meant when I was building a budget. And so definitely there were shortfalls. And Rupert's organization and other organizations stepped forward, and it was then a collaborative where we jointly sponsored these kinds of events and activities, and it had value added for all of us. So there was definitely good outcomes. So now back to the mentors and the work and the guidance that's been provided. As I said, all of the services in Alberta that are related to FASD recognize and appreciate relationship-based practice. Frontline staff, because they are showing up and doing good work and hard work, also need the support. They need support and guidance, and they need to have a place where they feel like someone's got their back. So in community, FASD is a sensitive topic. It is. To start that conversation and to do it without blame or judgment asks a lot of people to both hear the message, but also people to deliver the message. The advisory group and the elder have been so helpful in being able to set priorities. They've been so helpful in terms of making doors open, so that there have been presentations that have been done in schools. There's been professional development opportunities that have been made available within the service delivery systems on reserve. That can't happen from the outside. You can make yourself available, and if there isn't someone on the inside that says, welcome, and opens the door, you are forever on the outside. Really no different than other places. But it was important that the group that was around the table had an understanding about FASD, the work that was being done, and the reason why the support for the staff was so important. So it's okay if I move to the next slide?
Sure.
Okay. So when we were talking about FASD and it being a spectrum disorder, we needed to let our people that were advising us, we needed to let the community know that there's huge variation, that no two people are the same. And in fact, one person can be different in the morning than they are at nighttime. In the morning time, they can remember to tie their shoes, and nighttime, they've totally forgot. That their spectrum around how does a disability show up is varied both in terms of severity, so, you know, great differences between severe and moderate to minimally impacted. And then within the ways that the alcohol has affected the developing fetus, there's variation in terms of which aspects of the person have been most impacted. So you get variation in all directions. That's a concept that is very abstract. The brain, number one, is hidden. We talk about it different from the body. And the functions that the brain performs are also hard to track to just the brain. We want to give it other places. It's a body response. It's got motivation behind it. So FASD required that the folks around the table giving guidance to the mentor actually had an awareness and a sensitivity to FASD, and that the work was being done with kindness. So in fact, the two mentors that were hired in Alexander and Alexis, it was the steering committee that actually developed the name, the Kind Heart Project. And the understanding is that services will be delivered from that place, that it will be in acts of kindness, which is very different than how many of our clients have been received, because they've been in trouble. They've burnt bridges. There are things that have happened that are really, really unfortunate. So the growth, I think, within our advisory group was significant. And they've taken that message out to their colleagues and peers as well.
I think the one of the greatest learnings I had in regard to FASD was to recognize that how we did probation with an individual who didn't have FASD. We followed, Alberta Justice is listening, I'm sure, so we followed policy quite clearly. And many times individuals get released from court with 10, 12 conditions. And so we supervise them according to policy. So we go through the probation order, then we do an assessment which says they're high, medium, or high, their risk level in terms of how we supervise them, whether we see them once a week, twice a month, or less. And how we go through the conditions with them is quite clearly that we go through them, and it's more of a discussion than it is of a reading conditions, because the probation officer wants to take the time to ensure that the individual understands all of them and understands the consequence. What I've learned is that when you're dealing with someone who has FASD, if they get a probation order that has 12 conditions, there really is no point going through all 12 conditions. By the time they've hit the sidewalk, or by the time they've left the building, they don't remember any of them. And so we need to plan, and we need to deal with them with an external brain. Talk to a parent, talk to somebody that's going to be connected with, and have somebody that will remind them of when they're going to, when their next appointment is. Have their appointments on the same day, same time, same place every week. Not every 2 weeks, not once a month, doesn't matter, because they're at high risk to be exploited. They're not necessarily at high risk to, so that's one thing. The other thing is they oftentimes, well, I shouldn't say oftentimes, they may not be able to self-regulate. And so sometimes we'll blow up at what we would consider something that doesn't require that level of. So I learned that we have to do it differently. And so at the community level, we have people who deal with addictions. We have people who deal with counseling. We have people who deal with finding employment and talking to individuals with resumes. We have teachers at school who are working with students in school. And so as we begin to identify the individuals who have FASD, we also need to identify in our own lives, in our own work, how we can adjust how we do what we do. And in order to do that, it's important for us as the group that sits and meets to spend the time to create opportunities for training, for in-service, but not in a way that pushes them away in terms of relationship, but that draws them in terms of we're all in this together. And we need to be mindful of the relationship that I have with, whether it's the counselor or whether it's the addictions counselor or the employment counselor. We need to be mindful of maintaining that relationship because, you know, we're all in it. And when they can get to a point and participate in more training as we can make available, then we're all going to, they're going to arrive at their own conclusions of how they need to do what they do. And that's how it should be. They shouldn't be doing how they need to do based on what I think. They should be doing based on what they think.
What I like about the opportunities for building relationship, both on reserve and in rural communities in particular, we're so well placed to be able to get to know one another. We know who's doing what job. We have an idea about how that role and how that agency or department works. So there can be an appreciation and a tailoring of messages around the clients that are being served and the information that those service providers would need if they were going to make adjustments to their practice. I know that when we do training on FASD, it has been a long time story around there's training, there's training, there's training. So we increase people's knowledge and we change people's attitudes. And there's a frustration at the front line of when are we going to see that get put into practice? So being able to consult as well amongst ourselves to say, I'm struggling, I'm making this appointment, this individual says, a 9 o'clock appointment is just fine, and they've been a no-show for the last month. Every week, no-show. And the mentor has done her job, and she's texted the client and said, are you up yet, et cetera, et cetera. When you get a chance to consult with people who do frontline work with individuals with these disabilities, you may come to a conclusion of maybe I should try a different time. Maybe 9 o'clock in the morning isn't really going to work for an individual who has problems getting asleep and staying asleep. Maybe later in the day might work better. And that's the benefit of being in relationship, and how we can adjust our practices. We can actually talk to somebody else to say, I'm stumped. I don't know what else to try. And when we get information from other folks and guidance around things that have worked for others, then there's an opportunity for change. That asking for help also is an indicator of a readiness to receive information. So just because training is offered and taken doesn't mean that people are ready to think about it carefully and put it into their work and change how they typically have done things. To that, though, I will add that many frontline staff are very ready and very wanting. And where they hit the ceiling is actually management doesn't understand the need for the change. And so there are some internal barriers within organizations about what people can or cannot do. So the invitation is then for not just frontline staff to take FASD training, but then also their managers and their supervisors as well.
And I think it's important to understand the context within which we're working. In my community, which is the community we're talking about, if someone is successful in getting some training, hopefully, and obtaining a job, and it's a job that is funded every year, and so that job is out of play until that person retires or moves off the reserve to a better job or moves on within the reserve to a better job. So the movement that happens within communities amongst positions that are obtained successfully by individuals doesn't happen as much as we see out here. There's not a lot of movement. It's really comfortable to stay in your position, work in your community. You don't have to go very far. So there's tremendous amount of benefits to that. There's also a tremendous amount of expectation of the community around what you should be achieving because you've been there so long. Your job is this, well, how come you haven't done this or this or this? And so that expectation happens, and so puts a lot of stress on the individual. And so with that stress, the individual at some point in time, either they burn out, they become real angry, they start not attending their work as regular, or all kinds of things can go awry, or they can find a safe place, a safe way of doing their job that works for them, and develop some form of safety in being able to say, I know what I can achieve, and these are my goals, and that's what I'm going to do. Regardless of what the rest of the people are saying. And then, so that's, everybody's putting everything on their plate. So we come along and say, hey, we got this new thing, it's called FASD. We'd like to talk to you more about getting more training and adding more to your plate as we talk. And that's what they're thinking. It's like, oh, now what am I going to have to do? So it's recognizing that, and recognizing that many are in those situations. And so we need to come at it in a way that says we need to dialogue, we need to talk more about it, we need to invite you to things, to you to see presentations. We need to take the time and not push. We need to be inviting, and inviting people in to listen. And when they're ready, whenever that is, they'll do what they need to do.
Mm-hmm. I think when we have frontline staff in community, when our staff are able to work with community service providers, there's actually an opportunity for a little bit of role release or some help. It's demoralizing and it's hard when your clients don't show up. You've scheduled off that time, there are no-show. Okay, yes, you get other things that come in, but it starts to play havoc on your outcomes. So you've got this many people that are on your caseload and you're only providing services to this many people. Well, what's the issue? So it can be an issue of staff feeling supported when there's additional help that is brought on to reserve to provide services. So when I think of the role of probation officers and the GLADU report requirements, the facilitating the FASD assessment, that's a lot of work.
Tremendous amount of work.
That's a lot of work on people who are already very, very busy. The fact that we have mentors that are supporting those referrals, they're able to do things along with the probation officer and do things instead of the probation officer doing it. Like, there's an opportunity for negotiation around responsibilities, who does what, and just ensuring that reporting mechanisms are in place so that the ball doesn't get dropped. So when I think of First Nation communities and the need, the existing services, and also limitations around funding, when there is staff and when there is training that is offered that is affordable and hopefully close to where they live, if not right on reserve, there I think is a real opportunity for there to be help, real help. Not just help for the client, but help for the service providers too.
I think one of the keys to what we've done so far is the involvement of the elders at various levels, at every level. Mm-hmm. And the time that's spent conversing, listening, in sitting again and conversing and listening to their views on FASD and their understanding of FASD, because as we have individuals who get in trouble with the law, they get referred to the elders. And so if an elder that's sitting in the group that works with them does not have a better understanding of how different this individual is than this individual they saw yesterday, then they're going to treat them the same. And we're not saying they need to have special treatment. We're saying they need to have treatment that's special to their needs, that addresses their needs, just like they addressed the needs of the individual the day before. And that doesn't look the same. It looks different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just saying in my head lots of yes, yes, yes. We've talked about FASD being very diverse. You know, the Northern Lights being a picture of the different colors. It changes, it moves on you all the time. To adopt a frame, a mindset around how to provide individualized help, recognizing and taking away the sort of negative connotation that somehow if you get extra help or special help, you're being let off. things, we're going easy on you. And that's whether that's in education or children's services or justice. It doesn't matter which system we're talking about. Our clients have a disability that for the most part is invisible. And so when we have frontline staff that are working with them and advocating for them with other service providers, it's because they need that kind of help. It's not because our clients are being lazy, dysfunctional, non-compliant, defiant, like the language that oftentimes goes with our clients. That's not purposeful. They're struggling because of their brain disability, and it shows up different ways amongst individuals, and it'll show up differently on different times of the day for the same individual. So, yes. So when we take a look at the signs of FASD and the conversations we need to have with others, the Medicine Wheel provides a nice framework in First Nation communities for how do we look at this in a way that is culturally responsible. The spiritual domain is the one area that most external agencies have the most discomfort clearly articulating, because we separate the spiritual part and say that's not part of work. But we've already acknowledged that the best work with FASD is when a whole person shows up as a service provider, a whole person shows up as a community, and that spiritual domain needs to also be addressed. And in this model that was developed out of Minnesota, in the spiritual domain they have lack of family connection and support. So the FASD relationship-based services start to in fact address the very area of need in that spiritual domain, because it's building relationship, it's providing them with support, it's helping them heal the relationships with family, with friends, with previous service providers, so that once again they can start to belong. And there's really, really nice work that's being done by Dr. Martin Brokenleg around the Circle of Courage and Reclaiming Youth at Risk that talks about how fundamental it is that we all know we belong somewhere, that our presence is valued and our absence is missed. So, or not missed. They know when we're there, and they know when we're not there. And I know in Alexander there is an example of an individual who has special needs, and when he isn't where people expect him to be, people are saying, where is he? And he has jobs that he does. He's not paid. It's not a regular paid job, but he belongs.
Gets a sense of belonging from doing what he does within the community. He takes mail from one office to the other office. They'll send something back. And he's there really bright and early in the morning, every day, rain or shine. And when he's not there, people begin to look for him. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the keys here in life is when you're not somewhere where you're supposed to be, who's going to look for you? That there's somebody missing you. I think that's significant. I think the sense of belonging comes from the talk to the elders and the message they constantly give us, and all the times we talk to them is they're our children. They belong here. Yes. And the message they give to them in the small circles when they talk to them when they've been in conflict with the law is you're loved, you're cared for, and you belong here. And they come from that frame and talk about all the good things they've saw the individual do. Instead of saying to Teresa, you know, why are you doing that? Why you, and pointing the finger, it's much easier to say, Teresa, I saw you help your grandmother yesterday. I saw you the other day when you were walking with your grandfather and you were holding him up. I saw you carrying that stuff in for the old ladies. I saw you bringing the good deeds they saw you do, and they acknowledge. And so when that young boy leaves that gathering of those elders, or young girl, the chance of them doing something stupid, so to speak, becomes when they're going to do something they know they shouldn't be doing, it's like, what are those elders going to be thinking? Because they've obviously been watching me. It's like, maybe I won't. And the success rate we've had with that program is off the charts.
Well, and when I hear you speak and I look at the medicine wheel and I think, okay, so you've got the connection, right? You belong, and an acknowledgement of someone's watching and recognizing you doing things right. How that actually, when we feel good, most of us have actual felt sense in our body about a feel-good moment. When we are shamed, we have a physical response. Most of us look down, we kind of collapse in our chest. There's a physical response to feelings. So you talked about a connection and about it being positive, and there's an emotional connection and a physical connection. Do you notice that our individuals have brain injury don't even have to go to their brain to know that they want to do good? They have an emotional reality and they have a physical reality around, right, there are things that make me feel good, and being in front of the elder and that interaction felt good. And from that place, they will go towards the avoiding of the other, even though it hasn't gone to the brain to say, I'm trying to stay out of trouble. So it's a really lovely way of taking apart the dynamic of a relationship where we feel honored and valued in interactions. And I can say that I've received that as well. Now, I don't know how in I am, but I definitely feel very cared for. I feel respected. I know that people worry about me if something isn't going well in my life, and that feels good. And it also gives me energy to want to do more. So when we talk about in community, in the context of staff maybe being demoralized or overextended or too many expectations placed on them, those kinds of dynamics and interactions actually fuel and provide the jump start for the behaviors that in fact we actually want to see, which is people want to come to meetings, people want to talk, people want to be involved in initiatives that are creative. And I mean, well, I think the testimony is around just the sheer volume of people who come to the meetings, who contribute. And everybody around the table are busy people.
Yes.
So there is no exception. Everyone that has come has been an asset and offers more help than anything that they take away.
It's true. And I apologize for continually leaving Teresa by herself, but I'm fighting off a cold or just finishing one, and my mouth gets dry, and so if I just stand here and watch, more than likely wouldn't be able to talk very much because it's so dry. Mm-hmm. So just so you know. And thank you very much for the coffee.
So
you're a wonderful person from Justice, as are they all.
And I know some people are busy taking notes of this slide. The PowerPoint presentation will be made available right online, as well as I do have a print copy for people who are in the room. I can give this to you. So there are some realities around FASD that there's a message that needs to be told again and again and again. For the most part, FASD is invisible, which means that when you look at an individual and when they look at themselves in the mirror, they're likely to forget their impairment. It'd be very different if it was really obvious. Everybody would have the visual cues around, right, I need to slow down. I need to keep it simple. I need to say things in a very concrete manner. I need to be responsible for them to make their appointment. We need to remind ourselves and others that being prenatally exposed to alcohol has very, very complex ramifications. Things will change over time. They may in fact look very normal for the early years, and as our expectations of behavior and development increase over time, their ability to meet those expectations plateaus out. So then what happens is you get this greater disparity as they go through life. So imagine as a caregiver and as a community, if you see these little ones and you're thinking they look good, they sound good, they're doing everything that everyone else is doing, and then all of a sudden it starts to change just a little bit, and then a little bit more and a little bit more. They haven't become bad kids. This isn't about bad parenting. This isn't about an uncaring community. This isn't about an ineffective school system. This is about the fact that because they were so normal when they were little, people didn't have them flagged as needing help. We definitely have assessed adults in their 40s who were never identified as being special needs. And if I was to share with you their IQ scores and their functioning ability, you would be devastated. You would say, how is that possible in Alberta? In this time, could we have somebody in their 40s who could have been missed for so long by so many? And what that does to that individual in their daily life is every day is hard work. They are exhausted with just living. Because they look normal, we think just living isn't enough, and we put expectations on. We want you to, get a job and get a bank account and manage your funds and manage your health and negotiate the healthcare system, and the list goes on. And they can't. Now, they've been born that way. They don't know how to tell you what it's like. It's all they've ever known. They look at others and say, well, why are my buddies able to do this? And they, like us, think, well, there's something wrong with me. Not from a disabilities perspective, but there's something wrong with me as in I'm flawed. I'm just, and then fill in the blank, a loser, stupid, lazy. They use the same language that they've heard used to describe them. And that is a shame when somebody cannot do any different, that in fact they themselves beat themselves up and they get beat up by others.
I also think it exacerbates it when you're a population. I'm talking about my people. You're a population that from the first day you go to school, there's little expected of you. You're less expected to achieve. You're less expected to excel. And so when those expectations are not put on you in the same fashion as they are to others within the group that you're attending with, it's like, and oftentimes they'll give you excuse. Oh, it's okay. I didn't think you'd do it anyway. Or I didn't think you could. So with that in mind, taking that, and the homes sometimes our kids have been placed in to be told that they're stupid, they're dumb, they're less than, and be treated that way, to be at a meal table watching the family eat, and yet you got to eat on the floor. What does that say to you? That I'm as good as you? No, it doesn't. And so take that, and then when they have children who have FASD and they have needs, how are they going to fulfill those needs? How are they going to identify them? How are they going to nurture when nurture becomes a foreign thing to them?
Mm-hmm. Yes, the realities of FASD are complicated because it doesn't stand alone. The disability creates other problems that then compound and exacerbate the underlying disability and creates more problems. So the realities of FASD is it's also lifelong. So this is not something that is going to be cured. We know with proper support, stable environments, that there is room for improvement, not so that you can then pull out the supports, and that's where it's different for this population. Those supports are needed for them to continue to be successful. And the supports are in the community. It's in their environments, the environmental supports. The realities of FASD is that, yeah, it's expensive, and it's expensive for everyone. Whether you're on reserve, off reserve, whether you're little or you're old. And I'm not just talking the dollar signs, even though that's usually where we go to when we say expensive. I'm talking we lose human potential. I'm talking we lose the momentum that could be gained with everyone felt like they were included and valued. That changes community. It changes dynamics when people are left feeling on the outside. I'm talking about it's expensive to caregivers. Shortens your life when you're the sole person providing 24/7 care to a high needs individual. We can't afford that. We can't afford to lose people when, in fact, we could intervene and have everyone do better for longer. the untold implications around grief and loss. On reserve in particular, the contextual situations that happen where weekly there's a funeral, and that often the loss is unnecessary, it's violent, it's suicide, it's devastating. In small communities where everyone is family, this means that once a week, for those of you who are white like me, that would mean once a week we lose our mother or father. Once a week we lose a brother or a sister. And now I expect you to, be a service provider who shows up every day and does your work like nothing has happened? It is unfathomable. As an external agency, I got that on paper, but once I was working in community and people were letting me in, I get that in my heart and I get that in my body. FASD is another grief and loss. This is a loss of future. This is urgent that we get in front of it, because the children that are being born are not going to be able to assume those responsibilities that we expect of adults. This isn't just a First Nation issue. Those of us in the white society, we have the same issues too. And if we don't get in front of it, we are going to lose our future as well.
Teresa, I think as you talk about critical to our future, I think about it in this way, that as First Nations, we pass on our traditions, and we're an oral. We pass it on by telling stories, by transmitting our history and who we are through story. What's going to happen if we have so many, if we don't stop the tide, and we have so many that can't remember those stories? So it's our existence that we need to think about as well, in that sense.
Which is right at the core of the issue. Why it is so important, why it is that we need to work together, that the help be offered in ways that can truly be let in and digested and used for the good for which it was intended. So the realities of FASD has functional implications for individuals, families, communities. It has an impact all the way along: policy and procedure, practice, research, education, evaluation. We need to truly get what it is we need to be tracking. We need to truly get what it is we need to be doing. And we need not waste time and energy doing things that don't work, including some forms of report writing, including some evaluations, including, we need to get real, because time is of the essence and the issue is urgent. And right now, Alberta is well placed, given the commitment of resources and the development of the FASD networks. There are opportunities for things to move forward in a constructive way.
And to think that what we're talking about and the level we've reached at this point in time, when you start thinking of it's a whole community, it's a nation, and where we're at with it, and if you think in terms of dollars and cents, it literally costs very little, almost nothing. And so that's because people believe. But belief doesn't put food on the table. Belief doesn't convince someone to come and work over here for you, so that they need to feed, they need to eat. So in order for us to sustain, there is a need
for funding. Yeah. So I'm conscious of time, and there's some really good stuff. Rupert, are you going to be able to talk a little bit more? Because I think the next couple of slides are yours.
My throat is sore.
Really sore? Okay. So you want me to do the summary?
Sure.
Yellowhead Tribal Community Correction Society.
I just want to save my voice in case there's some questions that I can respond to as well.
Okay, perfect. So YTCCS is one of the organizations who has been a critical partner with the Northwest Central FASD Network, and has also been a co-sponsor and contributor to initiatives that have happened in Alexander, but also in Alexis. So Rupert has done this slide and has provided some background around some of our current initiatives around the probation experience, and looking at the clients who are coming before them and seeing them not as criminals, but oftentimes they were victims before they were ever an offender. And we encapsulated in this slide the fact that, you know, we've been talking with the justice stakeholders, we've been talking to family and relatives, and there is, you know, more resources that are being made available at the community level. Willing to look for help, meeting the right people at the right time. I don't know that there is a formula for this. I don't know why it has worked the way it has worked. It has felt like magic. It has felt like a miracle. There are key people that were triggers, and there were, you know, frontline staff who had connections with victim services and RCMP and in the community, and it's kind of like once there's been a conversation or a person in place, that ripple effect really took over. And I think you used, I think, a term already in this presentation around there being like a tidal wave, a wash of energy and people coming forward to say, let's do this. And so there has always been a spirit of yes, not a yeah, but, or well, maybe, and there's been no outright no's. So, you know, imagine what could happen if you locked everyone in a room and said you can't leave till you find a way to say yes. That is what has happened with these initiatives, is their needs were identified, the right people were in the room to say yes, and away we went. That taking root and branching out has been, you know, the analogies are endless, right? You throw a pebble in the water and you get the ripple effect. You plant a seed and it grows and then develops root systems and drops additional seeds, and you soon get a forest. And that is pretty much the analogy for working in community in Alexander. As a nation, there has been commitment from the leadership team. So for those who are external agencies and want to work well, know that you need to have a band council resolution, a BCR. If you're wanting to do work on reserve, you're wanting to be respectful, then it's no different than any other community that you would go into or any other organization. Be respectful and ask, what is the next best step? Who do you need to talk to? Champions were identified both on and off reserve. It is the way it is. You know, physicians can train physicians and they will be listened to well. Same with teachers, same with social workers, same with judges, same with probation officers. Yes, we like to have external information brought to us, but we want to know that someone has vetted that information and that it is trustworthy. So identification of the champions has been very, very critical. The leadership approval came with having champions and doing presentations and answering questions and making the time to be known and to get to know others. Rupert had already talked about the invested stakeholders. When FASD affects all of us, community, family, individuals, it affects every sector of service delivery, both formal and informal, at all levels of government. We need to be invested in this wholeheartedly. Within First Nation communities, because they're smaller and they have all those levels and all those departments, getting invested stakeholders and getting a really comprehensive involvement in many ways is easier. In rural communities as well, I would say that it is easier to know who's who and to bring them on board. Still requires work. The elder consultation has not been just at the front end. It is ongoing. And we take our guidance from the elder around when is the need for a feast, a ceremony, other protocols. And so he reminds us of the importance of not forgetting of the need for prayer. We can't do this work alone. We need the guidance of the grandmothers and the grandfathers who have left us to protect us, to forgive us when we make mistakes, and to be able to carry on. When all those things are in place, that's where we start to see the community capacity. From the white person's perspective, typically we start at community capacity building initiatives first, and we try to work backwards. After we've done professional development, after we've offered training, after we've invited people, from there we will find our champions, and then, you know, the ball will keep rolling. In fact, this is a better way of ensuring that the commitment is there, that it's comprehensive, that it's authentic. Do you have a breath to add to that?
I think it's another way of saying that you need to involve all aspects of the human being in each step of the way to. It's not like I can separate the spiritual realm from the physical realm in going forward with an idea or going to talk to an elder. It's not, okay, now I'm going to do the spiritual part. Now I'm going to do the physical part. Now I'm going to do. You can't divide it. It's part of everything you do. And you're dealing and working with a group of people that see it that way as well. It's part of who we are. It's part of every action, part of everything we do, and it's not separable.
And I know when we were preparing for this, you had used the words about conducting yourself in an ethical way and with integrity. And that in fact that those 4 dimensions on the medicine wheel and all aspects of self, that if one part is missing or ignored or proper protocols not taken place, that in fact it puts yourself at jeopardy for moving forward in a way that you're not comfortable and being perceived or realistically being unethical.
And knowingly. And going forward with that unbalance endangers all the people that you're going forward with and that you're working with as well. And so it's critical that the people we work with understand that.
Right. So you're talking specifically community partners?
Yes.
And funders?
Yes.
Yes. So for those of us that are outside of the First Nation realities, those are not things I would know unless I was listening. There needs to be some airtime for conversation where for example, when Rupert would decide I was ready to be told something or to be taught something, at that juncture, he would share something. If the time was not made for that, those teachings would not have happened. So if you think of a business meeting, how we typically run it, look at our clocks. Okay, meeting has started. We have an agenda. Look at our clocks. Meeting adjourned. And we're out of there. It does not allow time for that conversation. The warming up part before the official part of a meeting starts. The spending time after a meeting to do follow-up and to establish that trust and relationship again. So I'm not sharing those little tidbits for any of us to be manipulative around how to get in and work with First Nations. But genuinely, if you like the people that you're meeting with and you're working with, then create the time in your personal life, your professional agendas, to have some space for conversation that you can't put on an agenda. It's
and if you are a time watcher in a meeting the meetings with the Kind Heart group in Alexander, First Nation people from Alexander, I chair those meetings, and if I went strictly to the agenda and asked for an opening prayer, then went strictly to the agenda and you got an individual to report, then the next one to report, and then allowed a time for the connecting of those people, I'd be constantly getting interrupted anyway. People would be stepping up and walking out, going to the bathroom. Somebody'd be going to get something now. And it's a way of saying you missed a step without saying you missed a step. And I usually pick up on that.
Actions speak louder than words.
It's 1:45.
So did you want to run through the remainder of the slides quickly, or we'll leave that just to be handed out as part of the PowerPoint?
Sure.
Which one?
What do you think would work best?
Nicole?
I'll leave that on you, Nicole.
Everyone will get copies of the slides. I actually already sent them out.
Okay.
So they have them already? Okay.
Okay, fantastic. So then this would be a good juncture then to say, okay, are there questions, are there comments, things you'd like to hear a little bit more about?
Is there one or two questions?
Okay. So
Excuse me.
perhaps what I'll do then is I'll slip to a couple of slides that may allow for some closure. So Rupert and I have been referencing the Kind Heart Project. Oh, I need to click, click, click. And this just provides with some formal tracking of our process. So what has been shared, you've heard now orally, but this is provided. So sound bites, what are some important short messages that you found to be effective in working in community, Rupert?
Don't tell Teresa, show her. I think that's what Tony'd say.
Mm-hmm.
Don't tell her, show her.
Help her out.
I think we talked about some of these in terms of being mindful of the nurturing of those relationships at all levels, and that every time we come together, whether I saw you today and I come together tomorrow, first thing I do is I shake your hand. I acknowledge you. I acknowledge who you are. And it's not a real firm, strong handshake, because that's not what it's about. It's not about positioning. It's about relationship building. And so I shake everyone in the room's hand. And at the Kind Heart, we go around the room and we shake hands, and some people will give a hug if they're comfortable with it. But we all know each other very well, so that's easy. And sometimes we even let Teresa hug us.
Lucky Teresa. When we had the elders gathering and there was a large number of elders in the room, over 50, you also need to allow time for that then to happen. Right? So if we're thinking, well, you got a meeting, a gathering, and you're looking at the clock, if you haven't allowed for people to be able to do that kind of acknowledgement, like you say, things would have gone off the rails quite quickly.
And remember that each of them, in their own time, the elders will speak up. And when they do, it's not our place to judge what they say. It's our place to hear what they say and to honor that. Doesn't matter whether I agree with it or not. My responsibility is to listen. Mm-hmm. Not only with this or this, but with this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think one of the sound bites that we've used around FASD prevention that has been helpful is that, if you're pregnant, don't drink, and if you drink, don't get pregnant. So it's that kind of simple, and it's bang bang, and people get it. I think, Rupert, you've also said with the elders that you've said, alcohol's not our way. It's not good. So know your audience and then find the language that will speak to the issue that is there. So Nicole, do you have a question?
There's a question just asking how could we bring this to BC?
We don't cross borders.
We don't acknowledge borders. We're in this together.
There you go. You're catching on.
So, I mean, the teachings, I'll tell a small story. When I was 16, I went and worked in Chase on reserve in Adams Lake. And it was a summer program. And a husband and wife and their family adopted me as their niece. And they're still in my life. And when I think of the teachings that they have taught me, that would speak to the fact there are no boundaries. That in fact the lessons learned can be shared anywhere, wherever we gather, wherever we talk. There's invitations. People like to come. We treat each other well. So the how do we bring it forward, I guess the first thing is you put it out there, ask for what you need. You reach out and say, who would come and talk? Or can I come and watch? I would have to say both the network and the work that we've done on reserve has had that quality of openness, and I would say trust now. We've been doing this work now for a couple of years, so.
And the nation, Alexander, historically, anything they've accomplished, anything that they're going through, generally, as it talks about interacting with human and becoming, we don't have a copyright on, and we don't believe in a copyright. We believe ideas and processes and things you learn need to be shared. They don't need to be held close and make other people pay for them. The value in them is the usefulness of them. And so I just need to say that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So coming together, what you've heard between the Alexander First Nation community and the Northwest Central FASD network is that we have come together. We've acknowledged that we have different worldviews and that there are places where we are different, but we honor both perspectives. That's important. There's respect for both ways of doing life. And where we have some rubs, we can talk about it. There is differing ideas around the value of structure, how much structure, when do you put in place structure. But there has been processes and protocols that have been followed, not just by a funding perspective or a bureaucratic kind of needs, but actually from the community. There's obviously a need for discernment. So, I mean, what I'm asking when people are to show up with their whole person is, in fact, we need people who are mature. We need people who are in a ready place to offer that kind of generosity, to have that kind of courage, to be able to discern what is the ethical, integral way to move forward. That's a lifelong learning. Repeat performances. Keep showing up. Keep showing up as your best self. And offer to be as helpful as you can, and then, if you offer, deliver. Taking into account cultural context, but I'm also going to extend that to mean community context. The impact of grief and loss, vicarious trauma, post-secondary trauma, like the trauma impact, I don't think could be overstated. And that needs to be acknowledged in both how we communicate, how we approach people. Any of us who've been in a place where we've been recently hurt know how vulnerable we feel, how sensitive our heart is, how easy it is to take slight at things that are done or not done. We need to be awake and proceed carefully, both for ourselves and for the other. Rupert used the term a leap of faith. And that takes some courage. You have to decide, yeah, I'm going to go for it. And hope for the best, plan for the worst. I mentioned taking effective action and having that defined by the people to whom it impacts the most.
Sorry.
Rupert, I am so sorry that you're not feeling well.
That's fine.
Mindfulness means paying attention to
I'm a trooper.
Yeah, you are. You are. Mindfulness is paying attention to your own process. You need to know who you are when you show up in a room. And if it's a safe thing to do, you need to let people in and declare what's going on for you. Because, in fact, actions speak louder than words. So it shows up anyways. Take people out of the guessing. We talked about risk-taking. Acknowledge the protocols. And definitely the need for reciprocity. There is give and take. As an FASD network coming forward with resources, there are things that I can offer, and you can appreciate that if you're always on the receiving end of taking, that creates an unbalance. And so there needs to be the acknowledgement around also my asks, what do I need, and then both accepting and honoring what I've also been given. Because it is a two-way street. What is given and received is different, and it's a two-way street.
Which are part of relationships.
It is. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to comment on?
Yes, but I don't know if I can.
True.
Could I go for it?
Sure. So our futures. Very similar to the question that came from BC about, how can we get this going? We see endless opportunities for working together and to continuing to learn. It is always an issue of resources. Who's going to write proposals? Who's going to, from the community, be willing to continuing to guide our work, to ensure that we never devalue the contribution of the elders and that the wisdom is valued as much as an external consultant. Their wisdom is invaluable. So I think the future is unknown, and it's a world of possibilities.
As we move forward, we need to stop now and then to consolidate, to look at where we're at, to look at what we've accomplished, look at what we're missing, look at what's happening and what's not happening. And I think we're in that process now, and certainly we have ideas about where we think this can go. And I think the community, and I know the community has ideas about what needs to happen now. And that's part of what we'll be doing as well. Mm-hmm. That's part of our future.
So, thanks to everyone.
Yes.
A pleasure.
Well, it wasn't pleasurable, but it was a pleasure.
Cough, cough.
I apologize for the coughing and the moving around.
You did wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll come up and give you an official thank you. So if people have questions that maybe they couldn't quite figure out at this point, I can forward those questions on to Rupert and Teresa and follow up with you afterwards. You can just email them to me. I'm Nicole, nbludoff@casaservices.org. So you guys had a very great presentation. I think everybody really enjoyed watching your dynamics up here. And Rupert, you did amazing, considering you had a cold. So for everybody watching, please note that the evaluations will be emailed to you within the next 2 business days. So please be sure to sign the attendance sheet, and for those in person. Your feedback on the session is very important to us. And please join us for our next presentation on May 20th when Jackie Pye, Marnie Hutchison, and Katie Wiper will be discussing what's new in FASD research. As always, register online at fasd.alberta.ca. And you're also welcome to tune in to the free webinar, Brain Injury 101, Help Support Services for Survivors and Their Families. It's on Thursday, April 30th from 1 to 2 p.m. And to find it, just Google Alberta Brain Injury Initiative to find the link to register. Thank you.